begin with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the tragedy of Grenfell. Are there any apologies for absence? Everybody say no. And are there any declarations of interest? And therefore, can I move on to item 3 and sign the minutes of the previous meeting that we all agree are true and correct? Agreed to do. Next item on the agenda is planning for transition from the Grenfell Recovery Programme. Joe? So, do you want to introduce Joe? I mean, or should we go straight to questions? I think many of us around this table have seen this report several times. And as we know, it sort of summarises the timescales, key issues associated with the transition of our current Grenfell Recovery Programme. And what it's doing is asking for delegated authority to agree some extension arrangements in some of the key areas of the programme to make sure we have continuity of support to bereaved survivors and local residents. So with that, I might not ask you to introduce it. I might just go to questions unless there's anything specific you want to highlight.
No, just to say that the report is asking for authority to agree those extensions in principle if they're necessary and subject to some conditions. Yeah. And part of the reason we're asking for that is because there have been some delays in terms of selecting and appointing an expert partner. So the consultation on the new phase of support that the leadership team looked at in May is unlikely to begin now until September. So we just want to make sure that that transition is managed properly between the current arrangements and the future ones.
Who's first? Sarah?
So thank you, Jo. I know you've done a huge amount of work, and actually it's really, the data is fantastic, I think, so thank you for that. I just wanted to highlight actually, you were at the Health and Wellbeing Board, we did have somebody there from Samir, who's funded through the Together for Grenfell, and she absolutely highlighted how important and valued that service is. I know things may change, so the transition planning I think is really important, so thank you.
Which I'm just going to have Catherine.
Hi, and Jo, thank you very much. I second what Sarah said. It's it's really impressive paper and very clear. I just wanted to look at 8.6 and 8.7, which is specifically about the extended funding to LCAT and Kids on the Green. So I think it's really important that we're recognising that funding doesn't suddenly stop in March, and that we're talking about transitioning it through. So that's fantastic. But looking at 8.6 above, where you've got the stats and the numbers, I mean, they were really extraordinary, the number of users who are out of the borough in that. So my first question was, how had you arrived at those numbers, and how did you sort of find those stats? And then just reassurance, because obviously this is about Grenfell recovery, that the money that we're giving for the extra funding to is actually going to be focused on the Grenfell community of children.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bolton. It's an important question, both in relation to the children's provision and in relation to the adult provision. I think as we've indicated in some of the impact reports, the annual reports we've started to bring on the reach and impact of the programme, we have been on quite a journey with some of these local organisations. They were commissioned, some of them in the very early days after the fire, were very reluctant for understandable reasons to share data with the council about the profile of their service users. And I think over time we've built a much better picture of the profile of the people using those services. More recently, we've done a little bit more work to get a more granular picture of where people live. I think it's important to say that so you're absolutely right, there are fairly, particularly for some of the providers, there are fairly large numbers of service users for this period, so that's April to September, who do live out of borough. I think we need to look at the latest data, and we also need to think about there are other sorts of impacts of the fire that aren't limited to geographical proximity. So obviously, if people lost friends or neighbours in the fire, or were involved in the response in the early days, or perhaps lived in the area and subsequently moved away. So I think there's a bit more work we need to do with these providers, and we've had conversations now with both the Adults Provider Forum and the Children's Provider Forum. And there's kind of real buy-in for this work to look both at the profile of their service users, but also to try and understand a bit more the ongoing impact of the tragedy through the work we're doing on the JSNA, so that we can understand where geographical proximity is relevant, because often it is. And we've made a commitment that the RJ work will be more focused on the immediate local community, but I think we still need to understand who is accessing these services and why. And I think there are some instances where people are perhaps accessing some of the support, and Councillor Addenbrooke mentioned Al Hassaniya, where actually what's they're signalling is a gap in the wider provision, and that's NHS and council provision. So there are broader health and wellbeing needs which need to be met, and I think we need to be looking at both of these, and I hope that through the JSNA and the consultation and this work with providers, we'll build a much richer picture of what's going on.
Josh.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Great, again, thought and process gone into this paper with you and Callum as well. I just had a question regarding 4.3, which is the investment of other programs, aside from what we've mentioned, the dedicated service, LCAP and the adult social care. I know it's not part of the program per se, but the Grenfell Education Fund, is that intended to go beyond 2024 as well, or how does that fit in with the wider framework that you presented here?
Thanks, Councillor Rindle, and that's absolutely right. So historically, the Grenfell Education Fund hasn't been part of the programme. We are already now talking to education colleagues about how that fits with the next phase of support, because there is a commitment, a specific commitment through the RJ work to provide additional education and training support, both to the bereaved survivor cohort and to the local community. And it's important both that we don't duplicate, but also that we keep some of the good work that's gone on with schools. So not an answer yet on the Grenfell Education Fund, but that will very much, as we move forward, be part of it.
And we'll put that in the next paper.com. Absolutely great. Thank you.
And it's worth saying there are two other services where elements are due to end in March 2024. Those are the it's services which end in March 2024, which have been the focus of this paper, because obviously that's the soonest deadline. And that is an element of the North Kensington Inclusion Pilot, which is the advice and advocacy piece. So we're looking at options there, and the Community Works project, which are focused on employment and skills. And again, we're looking at options including alternative sources of funding. They weren't quite ready for this paper, but we are doing some work in the background on those two strands, which will take care of everything where the funding is currently due to end in March.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I thought the appendix saying detailing all that's really helpful, because I think there is a big concern about March 2024, and I know you are addressing it in this paper, so thank you. But my concern is, as you mentioned in 1.6 on page 10 of the pack, about the time frame, which I know Sarah has alluded to as well, and the extra time required by the outside body to speak with members of the community in various groups, which is absolutely essential. But will that then impact even more on the time frame? And if it goes beyond what you've already set out here, how are we going to get that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor McVeigh. I think that's an important point, and there is a degree of uncertainty about the work with the independent expert partner, because rightly they will have their own priorities, they will want to speak to the community in their own time. What we've suggested to them is that we put forward a proposal which we begin to discuss with the community so that they have their input directly. And I think you're right that there could be further delays. I think what we need to be doing in the background is always planning for that contingency. So we need to work with them. I think there's a combination of people wanting to see the new support in place quickly, but they also want to make sure that we take the time to speak to everybody that we possibly can. And they will obviously want to assure themselves of that, and separately they will be doing a piece of work on the ongoing monitoring and scrutiny arrangements. So I think that's something where we don't have an answer now, but we'll need to keep it under review, under constant review, and if it looks like the consultation will take more time, we'll need to look at other options in terms of the current provision.
Because I mean, they're doing, you said, the shape of the future provision on the storage restaurant is not yet known. So, and I'm just mindful that all consultations do take much longer than people.
Yeah, I do. Echo what everyone else has said. Another, I mean, you know, you've put together so many good thoughtful papers and so on. Something slightly tangential to this, but talk about all the data in here, but also the Growth Education Fund. When, in fact, I was involved with the setting it up, one of the aspirations, because we knew the children, impact on children would be so important, and sadly there will be other disasters, was that we would have some record of data set about the impact on children that we'd be able to track actually. I mean, we're already 6 years in, so that actually becomes very valuable to somebody else. And I just wondered what thinking there are specifically for the Growth Education Fund, maybe the other data that you have, because it could be so helpful for someone else in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Will. And I know that there is specific tracking work that goes on through the Growth Education Fund, but I think you're absolutely right, it's part of a much broader picture. I hope the JSNA is an opportunity to bring that together and to show that kind of as one. And interestingly, we had a meeting earlier with some community partners about the JSNA, and they were very keen to see some of this data and to be able to interrogate it, whether that's public health data or education data. So finding a way both to pull it all together in one place and be able to share it in a way that's meaningful and accessible for the community, I think is really important. So that's certainly the ambition for the JSNA, and indeed also not just what we have, but what we think we should have or we need to have moving forward. So making sure that the recommendations in the JSNA reflect some of those concerns around education. I know in the past councillors have raised issues around employment and training, so are there other sorts of data we could be looking at when we look at the kind of wider needs of that population? I think we need to reflect those in the JSNA.
Mary, do you have any comments?
We didn't actually scrutinise this paper, this particular paper, at our last meeting, but it's worth saying that we did have the NHS to talk about their plans for the future at our last scrutiny committee meeting, and possibly got more information and more data than I think we've ever managed to have before. Had a very wide-ranging discussion. So and that fits into, I think it's a very important part of this paper, but just to flag that up to the future.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Joe has said in response to, I think it was Sarah, about residents out of borough. Just to underline the point that there are residents who have fallen through things like the Grenfell housing policies and who are very affected, but nevertheless have been housed out of borough because of obvious pressures. And also there are people who are bereaved, who are living out of borough, directly bereaved, I mean. And also there are people who have been chosen to be rehoused out of borough. Exactly. So it doesn't necessarily, you know, and I think Jolie mentioned that geography is sometimes relevant, but not always. And I think perhaps it may be, we don't know, but it may be that some of these figures on page 17, 15, 17 are perhaps reflected by that. But at the same time, I know that concerns have been raised about Growth Projects Fund filling in shortfall in core services. And as Joan said, we need to make sure that this isn't happening here as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, any other comments? No? Could we please then agree the recommendations in paragraph 2? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, the next item is, wow, our council plan action plan. So welcome to Hannah. As you all know, we launched our council plan in March, and that set out our ambition as a council to become the best council for a borough that's greener, safer and fairer. I don't need to reiterate this, but I just will one more time. And the company action plan sets out what we're going to do to deliver those commitments over the next 2 years, including how we're going to deliver the cross-cutting commitments in the council plan. And many of these are about the broader lessons that we've learned from Grenfell and also responding to the challenge given to us by bereaved survivors and residents to use the learning from the legacy to change the better. So thank you very much for this tone. It's absolutely great. And I'm now going to open it up for questions or observations.
Yes, I've got one. And firstly, well done.
Yeah.
Swan song for you. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of work. And I'm afraid my observations are rather boring and niggly, but Jem is such a capable councillor that he's taking on some things from me, which is jolly kind of him. So in 2.3, he's going to be keeping residents safer, and in 2.4, he's going to be working with the police as well. And I think, and there's a couple, in 2.5 as well, and I think possibly on 4, I thought we might add Catherine on that one. I mean, it's probably just worth just. It's just to be fair. There is crossover, but anyway, otherwise fantastic. Thank you.
And I think there probably aren't many other things that we've been through this several times before. And we've all scoured our individual portfolios for things. But Mary might want to come in because I was at the OSC when we were looking at this, and there were some observations and comments from your OSC.
There were. I mean, partly just to welcome some of the particular areas of interest for the OSC were the sort of crime and public safety aspect, just because we know that, as we all around here know, how important that is to residents. And so there were lots of questions about that, which were ably responded to, and also sort of carbon net zero. I think one thing the committee did suggest was they'd like to see greater alignment between this plan and our corporate performance report. So, for example, in here there's an aspiration about hospital pathways. There isn't actually a KPI for that in our corporate performance report. I think, and that was taken on board by the team. But we just thought that, obviously not all of these are targets, but where there should be targets, they should be in the corporate targets.
Well, I think we also talked about the OSC whether any of the off-log stuff would be in future iterations of this plan, because we probably need to respond to that. But I guess that came after you designed it. Claire, was there anything from you?
Yeah, I did have a couple actually, just to make a few points. On 2.13, about improving mental health, I just wanted to note that the council also is aware of the issue of digital inclusion. And so while a digital platform of resources is to be welcomed, obviously there may need to be mitigations made with digital inclusion. And the other question I wanted to ask was what actually are, or where can I find what are the lessons that the council have learned from Grenfell? Because we can't really understand if we're learning those lessons if we haven't stated what they are. So I would like to see somewhere I'd like to see that written down if it isn't already.
It was written down in the forward. Sorry?
Council plan,
Yes, I think in the forward is the council plan, if you refer to that. I wrote a forward in which I was saying that we had spent a lot of time and effort to engage with the bereaved survivors and the wider community as to what they would like to see as the legacy from Grenfell, and together with them we decided for the council plan, most of their ambitions are wrapped up within the council plan, but beyond that It was really the manner in which the council behaves, the culture of the council, I think is a big legacy. And our services, you know, services behind the scenes, we're talking about. When you phone up the council, that you actually get someone who knows what they're talking about, who can connect you quickly, that you're not on the phone for 3 hours, you have to come in here, that you're responded to in a compassionate but efficient manner. I think those would be other things. But I don't know how you if you wish to add anything.
I think also some of it was addressed in the Grenfell Legacy key decision about the consultation. But I think there's probably something in Councillor Simmons' comments about how we bring that together and sort of demonstrate that we are becoming the best and bring all of these pieces together.
Is that what you were
and
getting
detail
at?
that
Yeah,
out.
I think that would be really helpful because it's
not
always
always
how
so
can we,
accessible.
how can we monitor that? And then sort of following on from that, this challenge about being the best council for residents, my understanding is that that comes from the region survivors.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I'm seeing that it comes from the region survivors and residents.
Well, some of the bereavement survivors are residents, some of the residents
Yeah.
are bereavement survivors,
Yeah,
so.
so I just want to sort of try and get a bit of clarity around that, because as far as I'm aware, the immediate community, local residents, have not issued any challenge.
Let me,
We talked about the aspiration to become the best council in our general council plan consultation. So we had the Grenfell Legacy discussions first, and then we had the borough-wide conversations about the council plan second, and we talked about the aspiration around becoming the best council with a wider group of residents across the borough, many of whom agreed with that aspiration to become the best council and understood where it had come from as well.
I think that's exactly the way of putting
So
it.
this is something which.
Can I sort of
residents
begin to stop you down,
Yeah.
only because you're talking about the council plan, which has already been agreed, and tonight we're actually talking about the council plan action plan.
Yes,
the KPI,
exactly,
so
exactly.
Do have one more question, but then,
Well,
as you'll see, we've got a
No, of
great
course,
big.
I just wanted to come back on that. So it seems to me that it's the case that this is something that, rather than this is something that people have challenged you to, this is something that's come from somewhere, we're not sure where, and residents have been asked to agree to it, which of course they understandably would.
I think
And I
this,
think
I
that
can
it's just
say
that-
exactly where. It's a challenge given to us by bereavement survivors. And
By
when they
Brenfell
said, we want you to be the best, then we had to decide what the best looked like. So then we had a wide ranging conversation
Yeah.
with emails, surveys, people coming in, people at the town hall, across the borough, for about 6 to 9 months, when we discussed with our wider communities to say, this is the challenge that's been given to us to be the best. What does the best mean to you, and what does it mean to me? We encapsulated all of that and put it in the council plan, which was agreed in March. And now what we're doing tonight is agreeing the council action plan to put some of those into action.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the basis of that, do we agree what's in here? But before we do that, can we just take the opportunity to thank Hannah, who's worked so hard on this, and to thank Amisa, because this is her last meeting at the leadership team. And we just want to say, I don't think we could have done without you. For the last 4 years or 5 years now? 5 years. Over 5 years, time flies. You have been absolutely amazing, totally professional, incredibly clear thinking, and I think you've really helped all of us understand better how to respond to the public and how to fashion a council plan which is really, really fit for the next few years. And then the action plan that has followed. So thank you very much indeed. And then can we agree the recommendations and
Agree.
priority? Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the medium-term financial strategy. So you know we've got had the council plan, action plan, and now we're talking about the money to make sure that we align the money and we know what we're doing. So Johnny, do you want to introduce this briefly?
Yes, now this sets out assumptions of the medium-term financial position for the council. Within that, as I say, there are assumptions and therefore there are best and worst business included, because there are many things about which we are necessarily uncertain, at this stage in the cycle, around things like pay awards and inflations, and government grant funding. But it tries to put down on paper where we think we are at the moment, and what we have budgeted against in terms of trying to deliver on the council plan and the action plan that we've just been talking about. I'm happy to go pretty much straight to questions because a lot of it are figures that you'll become familiar with.
Yeah, I suppose what this really is about significant financial challenges which are coming in the years ahead and what we do to deal with those and deliver our council plan at the same time. So it's just marrying up the two, isn't it? In one document we're saying, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is the document which says, well, this is how much money we've got and how we're going to get there. But does anyone have any? Jeff.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. And I take Johnny's point that they're sort of forecasting, we're doing our best guess, I suppose. We've often been sort of trained to understand that borrowing £1 million costs us something like £69,000 per annum of revenue. But what I haven't yet got sunk in my mind is what 1% increase in the pay award means for us in revenue costs. What does that look like as a sort of rough number? I saw today they're announcing sort of government's looking at 6.7% public sectors, which would obviously be a lot greater than what we've presented here.
Yeah, about £1 million it would be for another %. But the figure for this year is still being negotiated. So even before this financial strategy, the figure for 23-24 hasn't yet been settled. We think we've got enough budget for that, but you can't obviously be certain.
Sarah?
I'm going to say what I say every year, but I think following some meetings this week, Maxine was at one of them, that we really are going to face some more challenges with funding from the NHS going forward, and I think it's coming to a head, perhaps. I think we're all right this year, but next year is, we just don't know. So
You're telling us to be prudent.
be prudent.
Thank you. Just a couple of things about the council tax 3.2. I just want to say it's excellent that we give £13.8 million to help people not pay the council tax or can't pay the council tax. So I think that is excellent. But I suppose also that might well increase with the pressure because of the cost of living. So I don't have a sense that that is being addressed here unless I've missed it. And then just a more general thing, and forgive me, this is a very obvious question, but we are asked to approve this, but is it usual to approve a kind of a budget gap in a medium-term financial strategy?
Yes, I think that in the medium-term financial strategy, because it's sort of laying out the size of the challenge, and then the actual annual budget processes will meet that gap. So you can't set a budget, as you know, you can't set a budget that isn't balanced. You can have a medium-term financial strategy that identifies what we think the gaps are going forward. So it's kind of setting the framework for those future budget, annual budgets.
The council tax.
The council tax, it could increase. It is one of the cost of living challenges that I think we face, the uncertainties that Johnny talked about. So it could increase. It wouldn't. I don't think it will increase by a massive amount. It isn't as big as the pay. Because we do already provide very well for it. In full at the moment.
What we'll also do is keep an eye
Lisa,
on
I'm so
it.
sorry, could you speak up?
Yeah, sorry. We'll also keep an eye on it now as we move through the budget setting process. So if the numbers are escalating, obviously we need to adjust the budget as we set it. At the moment, I'm not hearing.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, just first of all, can I just sound quite grateful that in the executive summary you used the word challenging, but in housing revenue account you added the word very.
It's not funny.
Because it is very, within the housing revenue account, and I know we've got good officers in control, but we do have some big challenges, and I think really just to record on the appendix 10, which is just a reference to the fact that we will be needing to. There is a prospect of having to borrow more money within the HRA that we have on the horizon that we've looked at within this report. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if that was conscious, the use of the word very, but it certainly is a very challenging environment for the HRA, and there are in many ways less tools to use than there are.
Josh, did you wish?
Next thing, sorry.
Oh, next thing, okay. So anything else anyone wants to add, Mary, you?
We asked lots of questions and got lots of reassurance on things like, whether borrowing was on fixed or variable costs and that sort of thing. I think there were two particular interests. One was about what our support for businesses was, and I know that we're going to get some more information on that. And then I think there was just an observation that maybe our inflation projections, we felt they looked a bit conservative.
Yes.
And that particularly actually on contracts, the 4%, given the sort of pressure that contractors are under from their staff, the current circumstances looked a little bit slim. But that was only an observation taken.
Fantastic. Anything else? No? So can we read the recommendations in paragraph 2?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. The next paper is phase 7, the financial outcome from 2022 to 23. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight in this report?
Obviously it presents as a fairly large underspend, and I'm aware of that in the context that we've just talked about, very challenging environment, and there's a 10.2 million underspend presented. I think it's important to say that over half of that is contingency that we set aside, and it's good that we didn't have to use it. That may, as the challenges increase, become that we do have to use the contingency, and we are looking at the basis of how we budget contingency, having not used it. I think it is good, and that is half of the underspend. And the main other elements of it are that we benefited from the increase in interest rates. As it happens, that sort of can go either way, but obviously there was an unexpectedly larger increase in interest rates in year, which benefited us because we had quite high balances. And the other big one really was that parking income recovered quicker than was expected than we budgeted for after the pandemic. So although it presents as a very large amount, 8.5 million of it, so 85% of it, is explained by those three things. And on services, other than that, we were quite close to budget, really.
Yes, yes.
Emma? So, congratulations, team. I think it's always good that you managed to have an underspend. And I'm very conscious you're not running an investment bank, and therefore it's good to be conservative and be in this position. But I'm just thinking going forward, obviously you've got some fairly scary projections coming up, and just thinking about the accuracy of forecasting, because I suppose I've been around a while as a councillor, and forecasting is very difficult. And I wonder if you've ever looked back and said, what did we forecast? Where did we get to?
Yeah.
Because when you're making those forward projections, it would be interesting to understand what the tolerance has been. Because we're going to have to do some very difficult things on the basis of a forecast that may or may not be correct. And as we see, fortunately, we've not for the first time ended up with an underspend. And I just thought it might be a really interesting exercise to look back over the last 10 years. Where did we think we'd be? Where did we end up? and think about that in the context. It's, none of it's scientific, I know that, it's very difficult. But with the conversations we've got coming up tomorrow, I thought that might be an interesting exercise.
I mean, we obviously do it informally anyway to some extent, and I think they are very difficult, the assumptions to make. And I listen to a lot of economists and
never listen to economists. That's the first lesson. That's the first lesson.
And
They never get it right.
they always have many views, and often it is very difficult. So I think, I mean, we can take that on board and do that in a more formal sense.
Thank you.
Josh?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks, Mike and Lisa. It's a very similar question to Emma, but mine's more about an approach and how we look at it overall from the council perspective. So obviously we did the MTFS earlier, and it's quite, I wouldn't say pessimistic, but perhaps realistic in terms of what we're going to do. So if we talk about a budget shortfall between 32 million and 40 million pounds, then we get to this paper and says the council is in a very strong financial position with an underspend of 10.2 million. And it just doesn't particularly, I know one's looking forward and one's looking at the current opportunities, but in terms of a pitch, it looks like a very confusing message to the outsider to say, are we in a strong position or are we in a really difficult position with our potential budget shortfalls? So how do we manage those kind of expectations, either between members or the wider resident taxpayer, for example? And where are we actually then? Are we somewhere in the middle? Because it's very, I'm a bit accessible.
Well, I think we're in a strong position. I mean, I think this is a very strong outturn. I have been at meetings of fellow treasurers where most have been talking about having 10 million the other way, even last year. So I think our outturn is better than most councils. And I think it's for the reasons that I said. That could go the other way. They're mostly things that could go the other way. Interest certainly could go the other way. It's a more challenging, now that the rates have gone up, it is more challenging. And there's ironies like the fact that if we get better as we want to at spending capital, because we do have fairly high slippage on capital, we get better at that, then we won't be making these kind of returns on interest, because we've already budgeted for higher interest on our investments, but we have to pay obviously higher interest on our borrowing. So I think they are things that can change, but you obviously do have to be pessimistic looking forward, and when you're doing the actual accounts, you've got the real position, haven't you? So so that is more. It is going to be more accurate. But
there is quite a lot of pessimism in the air right now. When these figures.
I mean, I think the gaps that we referred to in the last paper are, I mean, as you say, over we've got best and worst case, and the best case is more optimistic. I think most countries have looked at, they're worse than our worst case. So so I think we are in the middle, or probably towards the optimistic side, in the stronger position side. Okay. But it is. I mean, I'm not going to pretend it isn't difficult to project. I think it's always been difficult to project, to do budgets, and even more so to do medium-term financial strategies. It's more difficult now than it has been before. We've got a lot of uncertainty about inflation. The previous question, I think that Mary raised, Councillor Will raised, was a case in point. When the strategy was written, the very common view was that inflation was going to quickly fall, and it's proved to be much more sticky than expected. So to some extent, the previous paper wasn't able to catch up with that, but will be things on the other side as well. So projecting is always difficult, particularly difficult when we've got the first period of inflation for 30 years or something, and 25 years. So,
Kim.
Yeah, no, just a quick one. I just noticed it might actually be one for Doug, but I noticed we provide in the HRA appendix on 334, we provided for bad debts of 760, but we actually ended up with a credit of 700. Is that to do the water charges?
No, we took advice from other boroughs as to how they calculated their bad debt provision.
Yeah.
We were overcompensated.
Okay.
You're just too conservative, dare I say. Sorry.
So we're not using the same system anymore. We've sort of decided to take a different view. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other observations or any other comments? Otherwise, please can we agree the recommendations on paragraph 2?
Can I just, sorry.
Oh, so I thought you'd already come in on this one.
It was the last one.
It was the last one. I apologise, Mary, before we agreed.
Just say the same old all the time, that's okay. Just to say that I can hardly believe it's me saying this, the committee expressed concerns obviously about capital slippage, and I'm the last person in the world who should be saying that, obviously given my history. But also the major concern that the committee wanted to sort of note and wanted you to note was our concerns about the temporary accommodation situation. And how that really represents, given how few tools there are at disposal, how that represents a serious risk.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. We were talking about that only this afternoon, about temporary accommodation. And again, I don't think it's specific to us, it's absolutely across London, but the figures within this report are extremely stark. And it is something that we do need to focus on.
Yeah.
That was it. So, anything else? Otherwise, we agree the recommendations in paragraph 2.
Agreed.
Thank you. So, the next paper is agenda item 8, which is Treasury Management Upturn Report 22-23. Thank you, again. Johnny, do you want to introduce it? Anything you want to highlight about?
Not particularly. I think broadly the themes are as we've described. The Treasury Management performed fairly well relative to expectations last year. And that was one of the 3 major contributors to the outstanding position, which we talked about, and was quite encouraging relative to other places. And hopefully that will continue to be the case.
Anything for you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'd written down that it's mainly a story of increased interest rates, as we've talked about. I think in the report it says that the 25-year Public Works Loan Board rate has increased from 2.65% at the beginning of the year to 4.7 at the end, so that's almost doubled. And on investments, I mean, I remember sitting there a year ago and we were talking about 0.13% was what we got in 21-22 on our deposits, and this year it's 2.09%, and that's an average over the year. We're now getting nearer to 5%, so it's a massive increase. Unfortunately, we have less on deposit at the moment, but we're getting very good returns on it.
Thank you. Any questions on this one? I think it's pretty clear. Mary, nothing from you? Can we please agree to recommend this report to full council?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next paper is A9, which is the Housing and Social Investment Report. Well, I would just like to say a big thank you to Michael, who has been absolutely instrumental in the social investment strategy. I believe it's your last read through. Yeah, it was last week. So what a way to go. So I will now open it. Would you want to go? No, you can. Tim, this is yours as well.
I may say, I will keep it very, very brief. Apart from, I just want to add to your thanks to Mike. You've been absolutely brilliant. So, so you might want to correct me when I say, I mean, this I think is one of the biggest steps that this council can demonstrate the change that the residents have asked for.
Yeah.
You know, we started 2020. We had the aftermath of Grenfell Kroll report. You know, and quite the assertions that we were acting as property developers, and this I think is a good reflection of that change. There's been quite a lot of change to the paper itself when it was initially brought forward in 2020. and it started off very much at looking at our corporate properties, but as you can see within the report, that's now morphed into a number of areas, 6 areas which are here and across the council. I'm very happy to go straight to questions and ask Michael if there's anything you wanted to add to my
Mainly just to actually say thank you to quite a few of the officers and councillors who have kind of fed into this. There were a few people in the room, Moira and Joe. I think it's been extremely helpful in terms of, one, giving us the opportunity to get new opinions of areas that we can support and facilitate as a department, and two, to actually lay kind of the first step in terms of what will be a journey in terms of social investment as well. I think that's an important point to make. This is the first brick of a beautiful building that will be built one day. And yet, just to give thanks to the councillors that have also given time as well as part of this. So that's kind of what I want to say.
I think that's what's so fantastic. We haven't been back for a long time, and you've managed to bring everything together, and we have a really, really solid investment strategy, which to improve the prosperity and well-being of our residents by non-financial as well as financial means, and let's get there. Are there any questions or comments or observations? Catherine and then Scott.
Hi, I might add my thanks, Mike. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to see this. I just wanted to find out a bit more about the KNC Co-works, only because I was involved in that, setting that up and removing it from the agreement we had before. And, it's fantastic that we're offering affordable workspaces. It was really, really needed, and more so than ever now for entrepreneurs. But of course, not only does it give us more affordable workspaces, but it also brings in more income at the same time. So I just wondered how you balance that out, and if you could give us a bit of more of an overview of how well you think that's worked.
Yeah, so just in terms of working with libraries colleagues on that, the main part for us was to also increase that offer as well, so that we get a bit more value in terms of what we could give to entrepreneurs that might want to take that space up. So we worked with Ravi at the time, who's now moved on, in terms of thinking about what that volunteering network might look like. We also worked with the apprenticeship team in terms of an apprenticeship levy. So there was also a piece around thinking about, could we work with those entrepreneurs to offer local people local jobs as part of that. So whereby we didn't need to actually change the commercial offer. So the idea was to still very much keep the overall commercial offer, which I completely agree with you. And there are cases where ultimately funding can go into council services to do that. But we were thinking about what that wraparound support would look like, and the volunteering network's been a really big point in that. But also in terms of being able to support our local businesses, who in particular, they might be on desk, but they're also thinking it would be great to have a local apprentice, and they didn't actually have any concept of apprenticeship that we transfer. So it was more about us connecting those two teams, and I think there's been some successes. The last presentation that was sent before Ravi left, it was a very good level of membership across all three. I think probably better membership than when it was managed by the outside party. And the next kind of steps is, one, to get that to hopefully 100% across the board, and then also just increasing the offer so it becomes just commercially a great affordable workspace, but then we're also getting social value and social impact on residents as well.
Really helpful. Thank you very much.
My just one observation to say again, thank you, but also I think most importantly, you've managed to get different council departments talking to each other, which is fantastic. And I know you're a really small team, and it's fabulous. And also outside the council, talking to our fantastic voluntary organisations within the borough. So I think just pulling all this together, it's just.
Yeah, and I think as everyone probably knows from different engagements that we've had, we've realised that that's probably going to be quite an important role that we're going to be able to play going forward. Which is kind of, as I've said, that brokering facilitation, whereby if it's the case that someone else presents us a problem from a different council department, we hopefully know the individual either within the council or outside that can hopefully solve that. And then on top of that, as we all know, the kind of unique projects that often have many different teams involved. And as part of that, I think social investment has a role to bring everyone to the table. So yeah.
And I know, Sandy, you are leaving, but you're going to be fantastic. Great. But there's more question to Dan. Will that connection still be held within?
Yeah. So absolutely. So we've already appointed Michael's successor, and so that function of the kind of brokerage and source of advice stays in the team. I mean, as we've been saying, if this is going to work, it's going to work because the whole council falls in behind it, as it were, because it's only a very tiny team that can't all do it itself. yeah, the idea is that the kind of the engineering elements.
So really exciting. So I think one of the big opportunities we've got is with our property and our street-based property. We obviously have that ability now to sort of look at how we curate it and give people those opportunities to start businesses and sort of subsidise leases. But how can we make sure that there's real transparency, that where your two people are bidding with very noble reason to start a business in one of our properties, we can be really open about how we come to decisions. Ultimately, you can only pick one.
So we've actually started those conversations in terms of some of the learnings that we've had from residents about what they would deem to be a transparent sort of process. And also in terms of the overall Grenfell Partnerships team, so we've had some conversations with Joe and Callum, because they've done that particularly very well already. And what we kind of envisioned is working with the property team to look at what the kind of key indicators will be, either geographically or in terms of that particular property. So just to kind of give a live case study, if it's a property, for example, that might have required particular capital investment from our property team to even get it to a decent space or a decent place to even think about letting it as a lease, that might be considered. But also, is it a location where anyone actually wants in terms of footfall, for example? So if I look at the Building Lives Academy, which was a kind of one of the pilot projects, that probably was an area from a commercial setting. Its location was quite difficult at the time, and when we were speaking to the property team, at best you're looking at maybe something like a yoga studio or something along those lines. But in our head, what it looks like is that once kind of a bespoke framework is designed in terms of the reporting, some level of kind of transparency would be that we would almost have sort of potentially some sort of online platform. Someone might go up, you have the opportunity to bid, and no different to how we interview or make any procurement decisions. There'd be certain key indicators that we would judge that by. And I think financial considerations are also there. Because you could also have someone that could come along and say, we can actually give 60% of the rent and the rest might be for social value. And in other considerations, but ultimately it'll be about us working with our property colleagues as well as other colleagues if there's a particular need. So, for example, if there was an offer from a member of the VCS, we would then of course speak to Moira Resoft to get an understanding of one, who they are, what's their kind of relationship already with the communities team, are they already delivering social impact? Well, yeah, we're very keen to make sure it's very transparent and then therefore reporting back on decisions as well.
Michael's here bored of hearing me say that transparency and consistency are the two kind of to run through this whole thing.
There's quite a lot of initiatives we've been undertaking over the last few years which would meet this strategy.
Yeah.
So this is just sort of shining a spotlight on us, saying, you know, this is how we have been behaving in the last few years and this is how we will in future, but just getting it all together in one place and transparent.
I mean, councils have been giving subsidised leases to favoured organisations since the year dot, but having a kind of regularised way of doing it.
Yes, a sort of transparency and consistency in approach so people can understand where we're coming from. Are there any other?
Sorry, I just
sorry,
wanted-
Emma.
sorry. I think we've all recognised the complexity around the property part of this, but nonetheless, it's the right aspiration. I really just wanted to take a moment to flag up the work the Parks team is doing, which you very much acknowledged in here, because the contract we have got with Ida Bird is absolutely fantastic, and it is a model of how this work can work. I mean, we've already delivered £90,000 worth of social value as, and I had a very heartwarming story, which isn't in here, the other day, about a young man who'd grown up in this borough, had a very difficult life, he'd been in prison, and since he's come out, we've supported him to work in the Parks team. And I think that is, you know, that's what I guess, you know, best this work can represent.
And I think that's an important point when we actually do, in a year's time, come to the reporting piece. I think there will be the quantitative KPIs in terms of whatever.
Exactly.
But as you just touched on, it's a really important qualitative piece that you can never really get with figures and facts and anything else. It's about, at the end of the day, what life has been changed, who's been impacted. So I'll speak to Monica about trying to get that.
Yeah, and if you change 5 people's lives for better, really, that's, you know, that's a really, well, you know, how can you value that? And also just thank you, Michael, and wish you well as you build the bricks in your next build.
So, are we all happy? All?
Yep.
Barry?
Can I say that the OSC was had some reservations about this paper and some concerns about it.
Okay.
And you know, about how things were going to be applied to practice. I think Michael explained to us that this is a kind of parent policy, and other policies for specific areas of the council will be developed under its umbrella. That's how it was explained to us, and I think we were concerned just looking at this paper about how social value would be evaluated against commercial value. We felt there was a lack of structure and consistent approach, which could be problematical and could be challenged at various stages when we make decisions if we're not more explicit. I think the reassurance we had was that this wasn't supposed to be the paper that did that. It would be papers underneath it. If that's the case, I think we'll obviously want to look at that more in future. But that was the reassurance we were given. But those were our concerns. It's about consistency and being challenged.
Just on both of those points. So first, taking the reverse order. On the measurement, we've been kind of, as an interim measure, we've been using this model. It's called the TOMS model, isn't it? Which is a kind of established third-party tool which allows you to effectively kind of translate non-financial social value into a kind of cash figure to allow you to kind of compare and make evaluations. That's been kind of, we've been unashamedly kind of experimental in the early stages of this work, and that was a kind of early experiment to see if that worked. It's been helpful in some ways. We've learned some things from it. It looks like it might not be completely what we need, partly because it doesn't quite fit with the way we do our procurement. So we're taking away from that, and we totally accept that this doesn't really work unless you've got a way of monitoring and evaluating it, and that's a really important kind of the early stages of the implementation strategy. On the umbrella kind of parent point, I think that's right up to a point. I think I'd slightly nuance that, which is to say, I don't think we should expect, or I don't think we need to have under this a kind of a procurement policy, a property policy, and so on.
You have a procurement policy with this in it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But what I would resist, I think, is the proliferation of further policies, but more that kind of it's more that this is an umbrella for individual projects which should be evaluated, as it were, on their own terms, but under this framework. So I wouldn't want to leave you all with expectation that there's a lot more policy work coming, because I think actually what we're doing now is moving into implementation, and as we've said, then kind of monitoring and review. And if we're going to change anything from a policy point of view, it'll probably be revisiting this 1, 2, 3 years down the line. But we absolutely acknowledge that despite having got to this really important milestone, we're still in the learning phase of how this is working.
So more work for you to do, isn't there?
Yes, please. Yes, we would appreciate it.
Mary, can I ask something? Can you just move just 1 to 11?
Not much more to say.
Okay. Otherwise,
I
see Johnny, but I don't see you lurking behind. Okay, everyone happy with this report? And we're happy to approve the new social investment strategy.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next 3 papers, I believe, part B is attached. Is there anyone in this room who wants to be present while we discuss part B? Because I'd like to discuss part A and part B together for each of the subsequent reports, and I can't see anyone who can't be here. I'm just checking.
Yes, turn the camera.
It'll be a bit of turning the cameras on and off.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of those people who are watching from home, we've been in private session to discuss the Part B agenda papers for the following 3 papers. And then we are now, having discussed them, going back into open session to look at the public papers. So which paper?
Paper 10.
Paper 10.
On for
So many.
and as
Right.
happy to give a very brief introduction, and in fact it's going to be the same introduction for paper 11. I mean, so these are it's not for an approval of money. This is all about a framework for contractors to bid off. It's about getting better prices on tractors and procurement. I don't know if you want to expand.
So we have been up to this point procuring our construction works through individual tenders. You may recall when we last went out for a framework was just at the time when the market was not very helpful to us and the prices were extraordinarily high, just before some issues around a possible Brexit happening very quickly. So we got the risk at the time was substantial. Also, we were doing the work estates, the estates that needed most work first, and therefore we were happy to do individual tenders and involve our residents in that. Don't get me wrong, just because we're going to the framework does not mean we do not involve residents. They're absolutely central to what we're doing. But we want to build relationships longer term with our contractors, especially the ones that are proving that they understand what RBKC is about and they understand what we're here to do. So this framework, and on the mechanical and electrical one, are part of 4 lots overall. So we did go live with the framework on the consultants side of things, get us to get the specification out, planning permission, and so on and so forth. And that's still working and it's still got about a year to run. And that's just going through the procurement process at the moment. And we are going to do a specialist one on fireworks, specific for fireworks. That doesn't mean that fireworks are not incorporated within this framework. We just feel we might get a better outcome if we go with that lot as well. So there's 4 lots altogether. And this is the results of the first 2, the major ones. So this is all the work that we're planning to do going forward in terms of fabric, carbon, mechanical and electrical side of things, that's all our heating plant, so on and so forth. So I'm taking both at the same time, Chair. So I don't know if that's. So these are the 10, not the next.
10 and 11, yes. I think that's it, yes.
So, and then what we did is we separated it into lots. So within the report, there's a scope of works, and we separate that into lots. So up to 500,000, and then between 500,000 and 2 million, 205 and 5 million and over. And it gives you a breakdown of roughly, if we carried out all the plans that we have at the moment, and we were able to do that, what the level of spend might be within each of those lots. And then, as we've just seen in in Part B, it gives you the outcomes of the tender process. And we still have Section 20 consultation to do, and we want, because of the way that leadership falls in terms of times, we try to get this here just a little bit ahead of time, so before the summer recess we can get on and get this moving, if you wish to.
Catherine.
Just looking at the recommendations, 2.1.1, the estimated value of the budget spend under the framework is 375 million.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
So I didn't quite understand why it was so much.
So this is the.
I just wanted to understand that before we agreed.
So this is a huge deal for us, and the planning on this has been going on for almost 2 years to get to this stage. Because it's quite a big procurement process. It's been the biggest. We gave it its own name, Project Union, so that we could move this forward. That isn't that we are going to spend 375 million.
Right.
It allows us to spend 375 million, should we choose to do so.
It becomes the kind of principal mechanism by which this very large scale 130 festival council has. Yes, it is. Yes.
So going forward, you've got a number of contractors that you will build relationships with based upon their tender and over those years. So it's a 4-year framework with the option to extend to 2 more, depending on how it's going.
Yeah, yes, it's a maximum ceiling.
This is not unconnected to the conversation you were having earlier about the strain on the housing revenue account. Precisely because we're having to make this investment in our homes.
And I was going to say, if we actually look at page 411 of the scope of the works, I mean, it's just extraordinary. Roofs, access, roof voids, basic stuff, rainwater, gullies, rainwater goods, sort of gullies, windows, lifts. I mean, there's not much which isn't in here, is there?
So if you put both
Together.
of these together, then it's pretty well everything you can do in property.
I was just going to chip in and say that for your surprise, because you obviously have to add in 2.1 in page agenda item 11, which is a further £250 million.
Okay.
I mean, it is a colossal scale. It is, as Doug said, it's not all spend it, and that's a programme over a long period of time. But it's what we believe is necessary. We've done stock condition surveys, and the element of that is first and foremost safety in terms of the work that we're doing in melting in. Then it's obviously as far as disrepair to the building, and also there's an element of greening as well that we're doing in terms of our carbon commitment. But it is a very large amount of money. Yes.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to highlight because it is a large amount to make sure that and it's very good that we are spending this money on the stock and improving it.
It shows how much improvement.
Exactly.
Required to get that to decent level.
And the team have put a huge amount of work into this. It's been, as Doug said, this is the combination of kind of 2 years of work.
Yeah.
But over the lifetime of the programme, it will save work and time and money through the way that we're doing it.
This year we'll be spending about 70 million on how much?
That's the estimate.
70 million of that total. It's going to be over a programme.
Massive.
Yes, I have to thank Peter Carey. You're putting this together, so it's
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we're happy to agree in paper 10, the recommendations in paragraph 2, marking what Catherine has said, it is £375 million. It's not, and it's the right thing to do. So, yes, we agree with that? Agreed. Then we turn to paper A11 and agree the recommendations again in paragraph 2, another 250 million.
Yeah, crucially, as
It's
Councillor
the
Taylor said,
height.
you're not agreeing that
Yeah.
each individual call-off decision is subject to its own governance. And
Exactly. Sorry, I was not being specific. So can we just limit it to what I'm saying, to actually what it says in the paragraph 2, and agree that on that basis? Yes, agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, the final item tonight is the Nottingdale Heat Act, which is very exciting. I would like to start off by saying thank you, because I know you ran a seminar or a teach-in or whatever for all councillors on the Nottingdale. We had about an hour and a half that we could ask you, grill you and ask you lots of questions. But I'm sure there'll be fun things that people want to raise tonight if they weren't at that. Or so, if you, Kim, start?
Yeah, again, I'll keep a very short introduction just to say, obviously, this is very much our commitment for a 21st century station or station at Lancaster West, and greening are obviously in terms of a net zero target for us for 2030. I think overall, I mean, we recognise that there's a lot of risks involved with this project, but I'm comforted, and I'm looking at Maxine when I say this, to know that we're not the first to do this as far as the district heat network. But it is very important. It's important for Lancaster West. It's also important for the residents who we very much involved in the process. We've also involved very, very good experts in order to recognise the fact that there is risk in this, and it's quite a complex. Including on those experts, I will include my colleagues Johnny and Jem, who are sitting on the board. As far as residents are concerned, we're giving a price promise, that it won't be more expensive than they'll be paying as far as the pass is concerned. And I think that, coupled with the work that we're doing on Lancaster West in terms of greening and insulation, will see residents having significantly lower bills, which at the moment would be very welcome. Overall, the cost, I think, if you add all the numbers up, is just under 27 million.
Jem?
I would just add, we may not be the first in London, but we're probably about 40, 50 years behind Europe on doing heat networks. So there is good examples out there of how to do it right. And it is, to get to our net zero, we had to make these really big investments. They weren't going to happen just by standing in the street and blocking the roads. They actually had to involve really big infrastructure. And this is something that I think fundamentally is what London needs to be doing. And if we can really show other boroughs how to do it, really exciting. We might be able to do more, but also others can copy us.
Johnny, anything from you?
As ever, I agree entirely with Gemma. I'm very fortunate as the chairman of the Heat Network to have such able lay members. I associate myself entirely with their remarks, and it's an exciting project for Notting Hill.
Just got one question,
Yeah,
slightly off
Josh?
topic, but if you want that James can answer. James, we talk about obviously investment in Notting Hill, investment in the heat network. I was wondering about investment in people as well, in terms of what we can offer our local residents who maybe should be getting involved, green skills, apprenticeships, learning a new experience in life or anything like that, whether that's, for instance, from the estate or the wider community, if that would be possible. Obviously not right now, but as the event goes on.
Excellent question. So section 11 sets out the social value aspects following the conversation earlier around the strategy, and certainly in terms of procurement that we've been doing on Lancaster West increasingly over the last couple of years. That's something that we've rolled like a stick of rock through everything we do. Really pleased, both from a commercial value point of view, that we've managed to come in £1 million under a somewhat pessimistic but realistic capital expenditure forecast, but also from a social value people perspective as well. Lots of commitments which will be contractual. I think that's important to say. It's often social value slips down the line. So we've got a dedicated social value leader at Lancaster West to make sure that is being monitored. In terms of the green skills side of things, it's in the new council plan, which we also heard about earlier on, to build on the work that we've been doing as a neighbourhood team and deliver effectively a borough-wide sort of green skills academy, if you like. We've got some real practical examples of people coming on short-term work placements and have secured permanent roles within the council. So that's absolutely something which will go hand in hand with us, given the scale of the investment.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Let me probably be a bit Cassandra here. So I think Jem's comment is, we have to do this project, there's no doubt about that, but it is about doing it right. And local government doesn't always have the best record in doing things in the most efficient and cost-effective way. So I think that's, if those are my concerns, but they've been, there's lots of insurance, lots of good people talked about. So, but equally, it's also very important to have some humility when you've been wrong about things. So I look forward to being completely wrong about it. It'll be a great success. So,
Can I just ask a couple of practical things, which I'm sure you have probably addressed in this. But looking at the pipe map, being a local resident, that's a huge amount of disruption in the area. I'm assuming they have to be quite deep. And knowing how full our roads are of endless cables. I'm sure obviously all the tactically has been done, but just a little bit of reassurance.
Absolutely. So just in terms of consultation with neighbouring residents, that's something we've got experience of, particularly in terms of the works that we're doing at Treadgold House, and initially in terms of statutory consultation because there's pipes and there's also infrastructure as well, which will be overlooked by neighbouring residents. We were having a discussion just today actually that we need to start expanding the same sort of holistic approach to engagement we do for our residents to our neighbours, which will include lots of people who are private homeowners and so on. In terms of the direct question that you've asked, we're working closely with planning and highways to make sure that we kill multiple birds with one stone if we can. Biodiversity net gain is going to be a requirement here. We know that Notting Dale is in an area of extensive flooding risk, as many of us saw in 2021. So we've been working across the council to make sure that if we are digging up a road, we're also getting other benefits around reducing flood risk. In terms of the depth, it will be very similar to existing pipeworks at the moment. And there's actually an opportunity to bring things. I think Councillor Simmons asked a question about digital exclusion. We have a number of digital black spots where current providers say they won't, or they're not even willing to come and provide services as an option for people to connect. So that's something we can tie in as well. So rather than just run one service, that's one of the benefits of it being delivered holistically through the refurbishment, is we can make sure that as many people benefit as possible. And to be absolutely clear, that includes people who don't live on Lancaster West, which it does. We do.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Can you then please read the recommendations in paragraph?
Read.
Item G. Thank you all for coming. Thanks,